Hi class, welcome to lecture 3, part B. We're going to continue on our lecture, and now we are going to talk about political ideologies. And we're going to define this as really the basic values that individuals, excuse me, in a country hold about the goals of politics, where their political system should go, the way it should move in, and the way in which it should work on achieving these goals. And we're going to talk about 6 different ideologies today. I want to point out, and let me go ahead and go to the next slide here. I want to point out that it's not as if government leaders, state officials are saying, okay, we're a liberalist country or we're a socialist country. Let's make decisions how a socialist country would make. That's not necessarily what is going on, right? They're making decisions on what they think is best for their country. And then political scientists, historians come in and categorize it later, right? It's not so black and white. It's not so cut and dry. And to be honest, no one country is really pure anything. Most countries are a mix of 1, 2, 3, or maybe even all these ideologies combined, because you have to look at the country and realize that not everyone thinks the same way. Let's take the United States, for example, right? You might call us a liberal democracy or a republic. But we have aspects of socialism, social democracy. We have tons of social programs. We spend about half our budget, $2 trillion a year on social programs. That is if you include Social Security as a social program. So we're really a blend of a lot of ideologies. And I think that most, if not all countries in history would be a blend of these 6 types of ideologies. So again, we're going to try to classify countries this semester as leaning more towards one of these ideologies because it makes it easier to discuss. But I do want you to realize that, again, it's more complicated than that. Most countries have aspects of many or all types of ideologies. That being said, let's go ahead and start with number 1, liberalism. So liberalism, the ideology of liberalism, and again, these are kind of how you think a country should be guiding itself and how it should get there, the goals of a country, right? So if you're a fan of liberalism, you place the highest freedom on political and economic freedom. And you think that the government and politics, the goals of the government should be to maximize liberty. Okay, so whether that be personal or economic liberty, you want the government to essentially stay out of your way as much as possible. And when it does intervene to make sure that people's rights and liberties aren't being infringed. So essentially, to boil it down, the less the government interferes with every individual, the better. So a very kind of libertarian way of thinking. Next, we're going to talk about communism. And of course, this is Karl Marx with his big old beard. Communism, very controversial, of course. Communism, very different from liberalism, perhaps the most different. It rejects the idea that the insurance of personal freedom will ensure prosperity for the majority. In fact, it thinks that it'll ensure prosperity for the few, right? The bourgeoisie and the proletariat will suffer. So in communism, everything is kind of the haves and the haves not. And everything is exploitation of other people for your own gain. That's how communists look at the economy, right? You have the rich people, the bourgeoisie, the poor people, the proletariat, and the bourgeoisie are constantly exploiting the labor of the proletariat for their own gain. All right, so that's how they kind of criticize capitalism or perhaps a liberal system. They say that the struggle over a limited number of economic resources, again, inevitably causes one group to dominate the other. Okay, so do you think that's a fair critique? Maybe, right? I mean, I think communism does a good job of pointing out flaws in other systems like liberalism or economic systems like capitalism. I'm not sure their answer is sufficient or successful, but I think it does do a good job of pointing out some of the flaws. I mean, if you look at, again, the United States, very powerful and wealthy country, we do have a growing wealth gap between the rich and the poor, right? We know that the top 10%, or even smaller, the top 1%, do own most of the country's wealth. And that gap between the poor and the rich is growing. So I'm not getting political about that. That's actually just a fact. Whether or not that's a healthy or unhealthy thing for our economy, I'll leave up to you to decide. But I think the criticism in this case perhaps is accurate, maybe not as extreme as they portray it, but in some ways it is accurate. So what they do, what communism advocates for, this ideology, is that the state, aka the state, the people, should own all economic resources to ensure that there is equality, that you don't get the haves and the haves not, and only a strong state can prevent this from happening. So in a communist country, you would have no private property, no control, no private controlled industry. Everything is owned by the government, and therefore, supposedly, theoretically, it would be equal. Oh, went too far there. So here's the catch with communism. You know, as an idea, it sounds like a good idea, right? I mean, to some people, yeah, everyone being equal, we prevent people from exploiting other people and taking all the wealth. Everyone lives equally. People may be happier. It's a utopian belief, right? The catch is, in actuality, communism has been attempted many times and it has not worked once. And you often get communist sympathizers saying, well, that's because it's never been truly tried. Maybe, but it's been attempted to be tried. And every attempt of communism has ended in a lot of death, a lot of death. I mean, whether you look at the Soviet Union, people getting sent to the gulags, people being killed because they're threats to power, people starving to death because bad economic decisions, or look at Chairman Mao's China, right? An estimated, you know, this number is debated, but an estimated 60 million people died under Chairman Mao's great leap forward in China. They starved to death because his economic policies were so poor, right? So communism has never worked in a large scale, right? I mean, maybe communes will work, but on the scale of a large state, it has never worked. Every time they've really tried it, has led to a lot of oppression and a lot of death. So communism is one of those ideologies that perhaps offers good critiques of other ideologies and offers a utopian solution perhaps, but again, is deeply flawed as an ideology and has never worked to this day. Next, we have socialism, and somewhat similar to communism. We might say communism is a more extreme form of socialism. Socialism being an economic system that also tries to achieve equality among members of society. It's different in the sense that goods and services can be based upon productivity. It's not an equal blanket. But you do also have social ownership of most industry. Again, it also depends on the country. No one country is purely anything, like I said. And economic resources are more well balanced, allocated by an elected government. That's a big difference as well, normally elected government. So we might say that communism is, because it requires such strong state control, we'd say it's both an economic and political system, political ideology that advocates for classless and stateless society, right? The idea behind communism is once we reach the point of progression past capitalism, past socialism, the state will dissolve and people will live in harmony. Whereas socialism doesn't have necessarily that utopian goal at the end, doesn't believe necessarily in the stages of history. And again, communism is often regarded as a more extreme and fanatical form of socialism, right? Next, we have democratic socialism. I'm sure you've heard a lot about this lately with the rise of Bernie Sanders as a very popular political figure. Democratic socialism is kind of a blend of some of the ideologies we talked about. You know, a blend of socialism and liberalism, where communism and liberalism kind of takes ideas of both. So I would describe socialism as, you know, economically, it's capitalistic, right? Private ownership is fine, free markets, free trade is fine, but it puts more of an emphasis on economic equality. Okay, so you're free to own property, you're free to own your own business, but there's going to be more state intervention in business. There's going to be higher taxes, both in industry and personally. So you're going to have a more egalitarian society probably, but you're also going to pay a lot more money to the state to accomplish that. I think the best example of this would be the Nordic countries, right? They have, free healthcare, free education. They have a ton of social programs, rehab facilities, etc. But, the government taxes them a ton of money. It taxes them individually a lot of money. So the question you have to ask yourself here is, if you're working towards this type of society, what do you value more? Do you value those social programs more, or do you value your own individual economic freedom more, right? Because in order to achieve these things, this equality economically, the tax rate will be very high. I mean, you think taxes are high in California, go to a Nordic country and they're much higher. We're talking getting up to 60, 70% tax rates of your income. Next, we're going to talk about fascism. Of course, here we have pictures of Adolf Hitler and Benito Mussolini, Italian and German leaders during World War II, respectively. Fascism, you don't see fascist societies in existence today, at least self-proclaimed fascist societies, because it's become a very bad word, as it should be. It's a horrible type of ideology. Fascism looks at society as an organic, whole, living body, and the state is a vital instrument to express the will of the nation. Okay, so the state must be therefore extraordinarily strong to press on the will of the nation. Now, fascism, very different from liberalism, is very hostile to the idea of individual freedom and equality. Because think about it, the state reigns triumphant over any individual. Again, the state is a living organism, and any individual is disposable to a certain extent for what they see as the betterment of the state, right? So you can see how with this ideology, how Hitler was such an evil person, right? If he thought this way, you can see how he made the horrific decisions that he did. And what you end up seeing in fascist regimes is you get people classified as inferior and superior, right? And Hitler did really think that the Aryan race was superior and other races were inferior, and that's why he tried to exterminate certain ethnicities and races and different types of people. So just a really horrible ideology. And as I said, there's not currently any self-proclaimed fascist regimes in the world, and haven't been really since the fall of Nazi Germany, and thank God for that. Okay, so I have here a couple of videos. The first one, and I'm sorry if the links are broken. YouTube's constantly taking these down because it's very provocative content. The first one kind of details Hitler's rise to power. The second one is the one I'm worried will be broken. It worked last time I checked it, but if it is broken, and this is controversial, but Google or YouTube Adolf Hitler speaking. And I don't want to give attention to the hate-filled ideology of Adolf Hitler. I really don't. Terrible man, terrible regime, obviously, doesn't even need to be said. But again, it's important that we study history so we're not doomed to repeat it. And we need to try to understand, and it's the question I asked in the last slide, fascism is not good for the individual. It's not good for individual freedom. Then how did a fascist regime arise in Nazi Germany? How are people willing to forgo their own individual well-being and the well-being of many of their neighbors for this super state, or whatever you want to call it? And I think everyone says, oh, that'll never happen here, or that'll never happen to me. But it does happen. People get caught up in a fervor, or they don't want to be the one person out, or they're scared. So the reason I want you to watch a speech by Adolf Hitler is to see the frenzy surrounding it. I want you to see how seemingly normal people can be drawn into a hate-filled ideology with a fiery speaker. So I think it's important that we do watch these things and, again, try to learn from them. And, Hitler was a very dynamic speaker. He inflamed people. He got them to hate people. He got them to sacrifice themselves for the country. And again, I think, guys, we have to watch out for this. It's something that can happen here as well. It could happen anywhere. And I'm not being a doomsday prophesizer. I'm not saying it's going to happen. I'm saying it can happen. And for that reason, it's important that we learn from the past to prevent something like that ever happening again. the last type of ideology we're going to talk about is anarchism. If you're an anarchist, essentially you reject the notion of a state altogether. In some ways, it agrees with communism, even though it's very ideologically different, right? Communists want a large state because they have to enforce their policies. But they agree with communists in the sense that private property can lead to inequality. But where they strongly disagree is the state can fix the problem. They see the state as the problem. So similar problem, right? But different solution. They view the state, even the state existing, the government existing, as an infringement or threat to freedom and equality. And the only way to reach complete equality and freedom is to abolish the state, remove the state completely, kind of return human beings into the state of nature, if you will, right? A lack of government so people can truly do what they want. So you do get attempts by anarchist group, and, this was kind of was happening a lot, not a lot, but was happening more commonly, 100, 120, 30 years ago. You get attacks by anarchists who are trying to kind of jumpstart the stateless system. And even one of our United States presidents, McKinley, was assassinated by an anarchist in 1901, if you can believe it. So, I don't think we get as many extreme anarchists anymore, but they're still out there. Some exist and believe that the state should not be relevant, should not infringe on people's rights, as they would put it. So I have a couple other videos here for you guys if you want to check them out, or just one video rather, of a guy kind of trying to defend and explain anarchism. It's a little dry, but it's optional if you want to watch it. So to close out this lecture, let's talk about religion. We talked about these ideologies that we can categorize different governments. And I think that although religion, technically isn't a political ideology, I think because it does inform policy sometimes, and it does have a place in political discussion, is worth talking about. In the pre-modern world, the pre-state nation-state system, religion was central to political identities, right? Particularly in Europe with the Catholic Church. They politically controlled many areas of Europe. And then of course you have the Great Schism, and you have wars between Catholics and Protestants. Today, most countries are secular, and political identities have replaced religion in public life. But there are parts of the world that still are theocracies. Like look at the Middle East, right? There are theocracies that still exist. Where you tend to see theocracies is countries with weak institutions. And reason probably being is they don't have that fundamental institution to guide the country. So theocracy offers a different type of stability that can overplace those institutions. I think a good example of that is Afghanistan right now, right? We're seeing the Taliban very quickly after the US removed themselves take over the country, and they're establishing a theocracy, a state, a government run by religious beliefs. So we've seen a rise of fundamentalism in modern history, and that is an ideology that seeks to unite religion with the state. So in other words, a theocracy. And it is interesting to kind of keep watch on this and see where it goes. You get different goals from these fundamentalists. Some say they want to return to the world to the supposed golden age, right? Which is political rhetoric in a lot of countries, right? I mean, make America great again, right? So that's not a unique thing necessarily, but it can work. If you're living in a country where things aren't so great, the government's not great, maybe there's a lot of terrorism, maybe there's not electricity or clean drinking water, and you get these promises, okay, we're going to take the country back to how it used to be. We're going to restore our pride. We're going to fix the problems you have. People sometimes go in for that. And I want to point out that religious fundamentalism is often associated with violence because there are some violent religious fundamentalists, but it's a very, very small portion of religious fundamentalists who actually seek to accomplish their goals this way. So most, religious fundamentalists, most people in favor of theocracy are not violent, but it's that 1% or whatever it is that loud and vocal minorities, what you see on the news because it gets eyeballs. Okay, so keep that in mind as well. Okay, oops. So to close out the lecture, let's kind of rehash. We talked about culture, we talked about political culture. And actually, we're just going to end it there. Thanks for tuning in, and I will speak to you guys soon.